Closing time. Open all the doors and let you out into the world. Closing time. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end.
All right. Mitchell, thanks for hosting service today. If you guys don't know Mitchell, get to know him. He's doing a great job in our middle school ministry. He's knocking it out of the park there. And he's only been with us for 6 months, and super glad that he's participating in that. When he's talking about Nicaragua, and he's saying whatever you're good at, whether you're a professional at it or amateur at it, the amateur thing that he was referring to is when he was watching me put together irrigation. And he looked at me and he goes, Pastor Scott, that's not really how that we should do that, but because he's more professional at it than I am. And so I highly recommend checking out that trip, because it's a life-changing opportunity to go to Nicaragua. And when you do that, here's what's amazing. A lot of you sponsor Compassion Kids in Nicaragua. You'll get to visit your Compassion Kid as well. And so at our church, we just say we want every person who calls Church on the Hill their home to sponsor a kid through Compassion International and sponsor them from Nicaragua. So when you go on that trip, you can meet your Compassion Kid. So enough of that. Let's get to this. We're talking about moving from a life that is wrecked to restored. So quick question for you. When you watch a video of a car being restored like that, has anyone ever done that? You've restored a car before? Raise your hand. One back there, one in the booth, two. We had two in the first service as well. Both of them were women. Why are you laughing? Guys, I don't know what it is, but like women in our church, they restore cars. That's cool. You know what causes wreckage, though? There's a couple different things that can cause that kind of wreckage, and let's just take a look at it real quick. One is wreckage can be caused by something that's self-inflicted. You know those poles next to the gas station, like where the pump is, and the ones that stick out a little bit farther so you don't actually run over the pump? Have you ever, didn't realize it was that close? You know, maybe you were making a right out of there, left out of there. You thought it was a little farther away. You kind of turned too sharp, created a nice little indentation. Come on, honesty in church. Raise your hand if you've ever done that. Yeah, I've never done that. Who would do that? I mean, come on. I'm just kidding. Or maybe, you were backing up and you're like, man, I didn't even know there was a car behind me. How did that happen? Has anybody ever done that? Okay, I've done that one. I mean, I'm living with 5 guys in a house and in the driveway. I mean, it's a single house and they're parking 5 cars, and I always parked in the same spot, and there was always the same car behind me, my roommate's car. And I don't know what was different that morning. I just got in my car, put it in reverse, backed up, and went, oh no. So self-inflicted wreckage, that's what that is. There's another kind of wreckage. It's other-inflicted wreckage. I was 20 years old. I had this consistent job where I was making a little bit of money, and I was about to buy my first car. Nissan Pathfinder, black. Not just black, shiny black with big tires. I was rather proud of this car in a really unhealthy kind of way. Bought this car. The day I got it, drove it. I had to go to the grocery store on the way home. Stopped at the grocery store. I get there, and where do you park a nice, shiny, new car? Way as far away as you possibly can, right? I park it so far away. It's back of the parking lot. I go in, come out, carry my groceries, get to the car, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Right there on my driver's side door, the shiny blackness, there is a spot about the size of a quarter of pink bubble gum that somebody had just pressed into the door. See, there's some wreckage in a car that is others inflicted, right? Some of it intentional, some by accident, but whether it's intentional or accident, it's still others inflicted wreckage. Here's another form of wreckage. It's just circumstantial, right? I mean, it's not your fault, it's not their fault, it's just things happen in this world, and there's wreckage. Rain, wind, and parking next to a big tree. It's circumstantial wreckage, right? A limb falls off that tree, or the whole tree falls on the car. We've all seen pictures of this, nightly news, and there's just some wreckage that is just circumstantial. Fourth kind of wreckage, sometimes wreckage is instantaneous, right? A person runs a stop sign, T-bones you, instantaneous wreckage. But some wreckage is more from dilapidation. I mean, it was weathered, it was sitting out there, didn't take care of it, wasn't washed, wasn't waxed, no oil in the engine, and over time, there's just a dilapidation that takes place. And somehow, these cars become wrecked, but there's a beauty in restoring it, isn't there? I mean, if you're a car fan and you love this kind of thing, and you see something that's parked, I mean, in somebody's backyard somewhere, resting between these trees and grass is growing up around it, and you in your mind, you can imagine that and go, that could be beautiful, but it's not. But listen, if you're not a car aficionado, listen, I'm not, and then here's why. It's not that I don't like cars. I just don't know how to work on them. I don't know how to fix them. I don't get it, okay? I'm just not that mechanical. But when I see something, and it's a car that's been wrecked, and I go, man, I don't even know what it should look like, and then you watch somebody restore it, it's impressive to me because the person restoring it, they had it in their minds about what it should look like. And I couldn't even conceive of the beauty of what it should look like. And when you see it, I don't know, I just kind of stand in awe that somebody had that in their imagination. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at someone's story. And so if you open to the book of Ruth, we're going to take a look at whose story? Naomi's story. Yeah, you're right. Good. Sorry, quick question. Just want to make sure you're with me. Today, we'll take a look at Naomi's story. Next Sunday, we'll take a look at Ruth's story. And the theme in everyone's story in this book is really moving from a wrecked life to a life that's been restored. So if you're having trouble finding Ruth, it's kind of a hard book to find. If you're in the Old Testament, and if you actually have a chair-back Bible, one of those in front of you, it's somewhere around page 187, okay? Just want to make sure that you're looking at this. By the way, if you don't have a Bible at home, take the one in front of you. It's free. We'll replace it because we just want everybody to have a Bible, okay? All right, Ruth chapter 1. Y'all ready? Okay. I just want to make sure I'm invited to tell this story. Here's how it goes. Chapter 1, verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled. If you have a Bible there, even if it's a chair Bible, here's what I want you to write in the column there. Just write dark days. These were dark days. Most of the judges who were trying to rule God's people, you'll find this common phrase. And he, meaning the judge, whoever the judge was, and he turned from God. And a lot of them, they started out well, but they just kind of turned from God, did wicked things, and most of them just weren't good. So in the days of the judges, so understand, this story is taking place in probably what is some very dark days for God's people. Here's what happens. There was a famine in the land. I mean, not a good thing. It's a great beginning to a story of wreckage. And here's who was involved. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to Moab and lived there. Let's pause for just a minute. Why did they go to Moab? Does it say in the story? I mean, was it out of necessity? Was it out of survival? I mean, we know there's a famine in the land, right? But question, if there's famine in the land, was it just a bad famine or a mild famine? Were they thinking, you know what? There's just way better opportunity over there. The grass is greener in Moab than it is in Bethlehem and Judah. And so we're just going to Moab because there's just better work opportunities there. Were they actually kind of seeking treasure? Like, you know what? We can't get rich here, but we could get rich there. Or they were going, you know what? We're going to starve if we stay in Bethlehem. So this is just necessity. Does it say? It doesn't say. Here's what's unique about the story of Ruth. You don't know why people do what they do. You're just given the facts in the opening chapter. All it is just these plain details. Listen, there was a family. There was experience of famine. These are the names of the people. And they went and lived in Moab for a while. That's all we know. But then you get this statement, verse 3. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. And she was left with her 2 sons. So they married Moabite women, one named Orpah, the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died. Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Whew. Wreckage. I mean, instantaneous wreckage. Not even dilapidation over time. I mean, in one moment, we don't know if it was circumstantial, like Elimelech, the husband, we don't know if he did something stupid and got himself killed and like it was self-inflicted wreckage, or if all of a sudden he just dies, has a heart attack, and it's circumstantial wreckage. I mean, we don't even know. All we know is this. There's absolute wreckage because she loses her husband, and she also loses her her 2 sons. You know, I never want to start a series on too much of a weighty note, but can we just be real honest? I mean, it's pretty, hey, what kind of wreckage have you had in your life? But this is the text. This is how the story starts. It starts a little dark, but yes, we'll move from the wreckage to restored over the weeks. We're going to take a look at the story. But let's just start with kind of a vulnerability moment here. You ready? We've all experienced wreckage in life, right? Whether it be the door ding kind of wreckage, meaning it's kind of small and insignificant. And by the way, every single one of us in our cars has a ding somewhere. Amen? Okay, in your life, you have a ding somewhere, guaranteed. And some of you have experienced some bigger kind of wreckage in your life, and I'm no longer talking about the car, okay? Question for you. Was your wreckage self-inflicted? Other-inflicted? Circumstantial? Instantaneous? Or because of dilapidation? Here's what I want you to do. In your notes, I just put those 5 categories there. Would you do this? Just circle one. I mean, if you're thinking, you know what, this is the wreckage that I've experienced in my life, just circle one. And I just want you to identify your story in this story. If you need to write yourself a note, like, yeah, it was, you know, just between you and God. Kind of be vulnerable in that moment. And we're not going to try and get too down in this moment, but the story starts with wreckage. By the way, before I kind of go on in here, there's something you need to know about the book of Ruth. Couple things about it. It's all narrative. There's no commands from God like, okay, listen, here's a part of the story where God shows up and says, everybody, if you're God's people, you should live like this, or you should do this. It's actually interesting. God's voice is uniquely absent, strangely absent from this book. You don't hear God saying anything. It's all just people. Some of them God's people, some of them not God's people, that are all experiencing life, and it's just all narrative. And it leads you to this question like, why is this book in the Bible? I have an opinion about that. By the way, a lot of people have opinions about that. You can read commentaries on the book of Ruth, and there's all kinds of beliefs about why this book is in the Bible. But let me just give you one thought for you. As you start reading through this book, and my encouragement to you is this week, read the first chapter of Ruth. Just start reading. We're going to be in chapter 1 next week too, but just read it. And like a good story, it starts being revealed to you in these layers, like, oh, this is the first layer, then there's a second layer, then there's a third layer, and you come to the conclusion of the story and you go, oh, wow. You know when you read a good story, it not only reveals layers, it actually peels back your own layers. And you find yourself identifying with different people in the story, and I think that's the point of narrative. It tells a story that somewhere along the way, you start connecting with the story. So that's why I want to do this. Listen, if there's wreckage in this person's life, let's just ask the question, what does wreckage look like for us? Because maybe where this story is headed from wreckage to restoration, maybe our lives are headed the same way, or maybe you've already experienced that as well. So in the book of Ruth, the last thing about this that I just want you to pay attention to as you read this is that every Old Testament story, I think, has an answer in the New Testament. Meaning when you read something from the Old Testament, it either points straight to Jesus, like, pay attention, Jesus told a story about this, Jesus made a point about this. There's something in the New Testament that connects to this, and we'll get to that by the end of this message. But as you're reading the first chapter, think about, well, how does the New Testament, how does the story of Jesus, the story of the church, answer what's being presented here? Okay? Let's get back to her story. Here it is. In verse 6, she's already had this total wreckage in her life. Here's her response. When Naomi heard, verse 6, when Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. What was her response to wreckage? I mean, just underline this. It's in verse 6. She prepared to return home from there. I'm going to get to there in just a minute. Her response was this. Listen, I've experienced wreckage in my life. There's a darkness about kind of how I've experienced being in Moab. And here's what I need to do. I need to return home. I'll come back to that in just a minute. Was it a good thing to go to Moab? Was it an okay thing? I mean, we all could shake our heads and be like, no, I mean, why would they ever go to Moab? Look how bad life was. But she didn't know that going there. Now listen to this. Moab is actually filled with people who weren't honoring God. God had warned, listen, if you go live among people who don't honor me, you'll turn out like them. They will rub off on you. He specifically warned too, don't marry people from there. And when Elimelech and Naomi show up there with their 2 sons, those 2 sons marry Moabite women. And then the husband and the 2 sons die. And I'm not saying that's cause and effect. I'm just saying that Moab, it doesn't say why she went there other than the fact that the family went there because there was famine. Listen, I know this, that you and I have all lived in Moab, haven't we? I don't mean geographically. What I mean by Moab is, man, when life gets bad in one place, you don't like where you're living, haven't you ever had that thought? You know what? The grass is greener on the other side. You know what? I could go live there and spread my wings a little bit and kind of experience the world a little bit. You know, I just want to I want to do my own thing for a little while. I mean, most of us, we call Moab our 20s. We call Moab going to college, don't we? As far away as I can. My parents are here. I'm going to college, not around the corner. I'm going to go around the state. I need to be far away because I'm going to live in Moab for a little bit. I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to experience some things. It'll be great. And a lot of people, sooner or later, Moab, they experienced some wreckage there. And like Naomi, she had to decide, you know what, I'm going to return home because you know what, Moab isn't what I thought it would be. I don't know what life was like for you in Moab, but she decided she's going to return home. And here's her return. Fast forward. Go all the way to verse 19, chapter 1. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" Would you just underline that phrase? I'm going to explain it in just a moment. Here's what Naomi says to these people. I mean, she walks in and says, "Hey, is that Naomi? It kind of looks like her, but maybe it's not. I mean, she's been gone at least 10 years, maybe 12. And she kind of looks like Naomi. I remember what she used to look like. I remember how she used to talk. I remember how she used to act. I remember how she used to respond. And it kind of looks like Naomi, but there's something totally different about this person." She speaks into this. Get this. Verse 20. She says, "Don't call me Naomi." She told them, "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter." Her name, Naomi, means pleasant. The word Mara means bitter. She says, "Hey, yeah, it's me, Naomi, but don't call me Naomi because my life is no longer pleasant. I used to be pleasant, but I've experienced wreckage. I want you to call me Mara. I want you to call me bitter. I used to be pleasant, but I'm bitter today." By the way, she places blame in this. Look at this. Verse 20. "Because the Almighty has made my life very bitter, I went away full, but the Lord brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." And when she showed up, this is what I had you underline, the people said, "Could this be Naomi?" You know why they said that? Because when people face wreckage in life, it makes them almost unrecognizable at times. Don't miss this. Wreckage can change you. Wreckage can change me. And it's not always the wreckage, it's how we handle the wreckage in our life that can change us. She just makes it really plain. Listen, I used to be pleasant. I used to be Naomi. But I'm not Naomi anymore. I'm bitter. Have you ever thought about how wreckage in people's lives, whether it be self-inflicted or others-inflicted or circumstantial or instantaneous wreckage or dilapidation type of wreckage, have you ever wondered how it changes people? I put a bunch of words in your notes. Take a look at this. Sometimes people get bitter. Sometimes people get resentful. Sometimes people, they start blaming everybody else. By the way, wouldn't it be nice if other-inflicted wreckage was just that simple? This person did this to me, and it's their fault. Here's reality. Even if some wreckage has been other-inflicted, oftentimes what happens in our lives is we then start making responses and decisions and choices that create greater wreckage, and it becomes self-inflicted wreckage. Doesn't it? Am I talking to myself? It got quiet in here no, it's always their fault. Apathetic. Sometimes that's how people change. They used to be enthusiastic and now they're apathetic. Some people used to be positive, now they're depressed. There's an anger that can go along with that. Sometimes it's pessimistic. Sometimes it's hopeless. I had someone text me right after the service and say, you know what, there's another result. One is fearful. It's like, that's good. Add that to the list, okay? Fearful. I love this next word. Well, I don't like it. I just think it's interestingly descriptive. Dark. Ever met people who are just dark? See, darkness, you just can't see things that are positive. Even though there's good things in your life, man. Life has been such a wreck that you just see things, everything is dark now. Sometimes it'll lead to you feeling betrayed, unloved, abandoned. The interesting part about this, I think, is oftentimes when people start changing, they don't even know they're changing. It's been so long since they figuratively have looked in a mirror to say, I wonder how my soul's doing. I wonder how emotionally I'm doing. I wonder how my relationships with people are doing. They just don't look at that. And before they realized it, they went from Naomi to Mara, from pleasant to bitter. By the way, you know who's not fooled by us? Other people, our family. They know. They look at you and go, you know what? You used to be nice. You're not anymore. Sometimes we're the last people to know. The interesting thing about Naomi, though, is she sees it in herself. She's saying, I have changed. I used to be like this, and I'm no longer like this. I'm actually like this. Somebody last week was sharing with me the science behind how this actually happens. Donald Hebb, he coined this phrase, and I'm not sure this is in your notes, but here's what he says. Neurons that fire together wire together. What he's saying is that in your brain, when the neurons fire off, no matter if this experience based off of wreckage, when you experience wreckage in your life, your neurons fire. If they continuously fire off together, they wire together. What he's referring to is this. Here it is. The neuroplasticity of your brain. Welcome to school, people. Here we go. The neuroplasticity of your brain, meaning this. Your brain is malleable. It has the ability to change and to function differently and actually hardwired differently based off of your experiences and your continuous default responses to those experiences. Let me give this in very layman's terms that even I could understand, okay? Because I wrote that down after hours of reading about this, okay? So let me say it this way. It's in your notes. Our brains become velcro for the bad. And our brains become teflon for the good when we focus on the negative. Let me explain that. We know what velcro is, right? Velcro, throw some a bunch that has those kind of little claw things, boom, it sticks. It does not come off, or at least not easy. You got to rip it off. It's sticky. Teflon. Have you ever had a Teflon pan? I don't mean the kind that are in my house that look like they've been at the bottom of the ocean for a long time. Does anybody have one of those? Yeah, me too. But when you get the new one, you know, and like you don't even need butter or oil. You could fry an egg on there, you swish it around. I mean, there's just, nothing will stick to it. When you've experienced wreckage in your life, and all of a sudden you don't know how to handle that, and you move from Naomi to Mara, what's physiologically is happening in your brain is that it's rewiring, and your default no longer becomes pleasant. It can actually become bitter. And so the experiences we have in our life, it's like Velcro to our brains, all the bad experiences, and we pay attention to all the negative and all the bad. And the good experiences slip off because our brain is like Teflon to good experiences. Maybe I'm talking about you. Maybe that was a season in your life. Maybe you're recognizing that there's people you've met like that because of the wreckage in their life, everything that's negative sticks. And all the good, they can't even make themselves feel it. Listen, growing up, you had a default response when life got hard. And some of those default responses were healthy. What science is trying to say is this. Your default response, your brain is rewiring itself based off of the experiences you have and how you respond to your wreckage. Can I give you the good news on that, though? If it can happen in one direction, it can also happen in the other direction. Meaning that if you've had negative experiences in your life, how you handle that. Meaning instead of focusing on the negative all the time, we're going to focus on the positive, the things that are good. If you do that, listen, the neuroplasticity of your brain, your brain will rewire itself to be able to be Velcro for the good experiences in your life and be Teflon to the bad. We're not ignorant like, oh no, nothing bad ever happens to me. That's just ignorance, right? That's denial. But think about this for a minute. Has someone ever said something critical to you? And maybe in that job review, like you got criticized, but you also got praised, but what stuck with you? It's the negative, isn't it? And somehow our insecurities and our fears because of the wreckage in our life, man, we are like velcro to the negative. You know why we started our service today the way we did? We didn't start with, hi, welcome, open your Bibles to the book of Ruth, and let me tell you about Wreckage. We didn't start there. Why? No one would come back to church, first of all. But second of all, we don't do that because this service is not just about us. It's about God. So we start with praise and thanksgiving to Him so that our minds are set right. It's about focusing on the thing that is positive and right. Because no matter what wreckage you've had in your life, you have things to be thankful for. God gave His Son for your life and your sin and your wreckage so you could be forgiven and in relationship with Him and one day be in His presence in heaven. We thank Him for that every single Sunday. That's why we start the service with Him. Thank you. I was hoping somebody say that. We have a lot to be thankful for. It's interesting because the science behind this is actually catching up to the scriptures that was written 2,000 years ago. Listen to what Paul wrote in the book of Philippians. He says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is pure, or whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, there it is, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, you know what the next words are? Here's what you're to do with all those good things. You're to, what both of you said. Think upon such things. Think about this. Dwell on it. Let that be the focus of your life. All those good things in your life, think about it. Why? Do you think God was like, oh, I never knew this about how I created the brain before. There's this neuroplasticity and like if things that fire together, rewire together. And God's not surprised by that. The scriptures knew what was going on in our brains and how God created us. Listen, when we focus on the things that are right, beautiful, lovely, and good, we have to because it's not our natural default, is it? A thing that sticks to us are negative experiences, and God says, don't do that. And if you have a negative response to a lot of life right now, can I just say this? God can rewire your heart. He can rewire your soul. He can rewire your brain. It doesn't have to be that way. There's hope. Can I ask you just real quick, maybe one more vulnerable question? And I promise I'll get positive in just a minute. Would you do this? You know the list that I gave you there about what it does to people sometimes, bitter, resentful? Would you just take your pen or pencil and just kind of hide your notes real quick? And would you circle one of those? One of those that's maybe a temptation for you. Like, you know what? When I experience wreckage, I'm tempted to go dark. Or I'm tempted to blame other people. Or maybe it's something that's going on in your life right now and you're like, I am just angry. And would you just circle that? I mean, just all honesty, because I'm not sure we're able to actually recover without self-identifying. This is kind of where I'm at. I love the fact that Naomi did. She's this. Hey, you know what? I used to be Naomi. I used to be pleasant, but now I'm Mara. I'm bitter. She's admitting it. I think admitting it is part of us getting better. So take a minute. You're all still looking at me. Look down, just circle one. Between you and God, not going to survey. We have an opportunity to respond to the wreckage in our life. And I wrote a couple different responses. Here's the first one. Ready? We can turn against God. I don't know if Naomi actually turned against God, but her words kind of reflect that she had been turning against God. Listen to what she writes. The Almighty has made my life very bitter. It's God's fault. He did this to me. The Lord has brought me back empty. The Lord has afflicted me. Afflicted. God afflicted me. I mean, it seems like she is placing blame, turning against. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. Here's what's interesting. If the Old Testament points to a New Testament story, here's the thing that came to my mind. Jesus, he gave this pretty incredible promise when it came to trouble. He's trying to prepare his disciples to live in the world without him. And here's what he says. He says, in the world, you will have trouble. So when trouble and wreckage came to Naomi's world, I mean, I'm just thinking Jesus is like, why are you surprised? I promised it will be there. Don't turn away from me. Don't turn against me. I told you it was coming. Here's how the text actually reads in John 16:33. In this world, you will have trouble, but take heart. I've overcome the world. He's saying, I've actually created a world for you that's beyond this world. It's a place in God's presence in heaven, and I want you to live for that. You'll have wreckage today. And by the way, okay, hear me. I am not minimizing anybody's pain today by saying, like, hey, I know you might have some wreckage in your life, but heaven's coming. Cheer up. No. I think God's there with us when he says, isn't in this world you'll have trouble. He promises he'll be with us in the midst of that. He mourns alongside of us at moments. Some of those situations he will choose to fix this side of heaven. And sometimes he'll choose to fix it on the backside of heaven. But there's moments where we have a choice to turn against God or stay with God. We have another option too. We can just numb the pain, number 2. You know what? There's wreckage in life. It hurts. Absolutely. And we have an opportunity. You know what? I'm just going to satiate that pain. Whether it be something as innocent as shopping or food or just boozing it up to like, you know what? I'm just going to, I don't want to hurt anymore. And when I do this thing, it feels better. And so I keep covering my pain with pleasure. And we understand that leads to addiction, right? And all kinds of addiction. You know, I just picked 3 right there. Food, shopping, alcohol. There's all kinds of addictions, though. So that can be a response to tragedy. It's people choose this all the time. Here's a third choice. Ready? You can just give up. I'm done. I'm just going to lower my expectations. You know what? I experienced wreckage in a relationship, and so therefore, here's the truth. Listen. All guys are dogs, and they just can't be trusted. I just will never trust a man again. Women, they'll just let you down. So here, man, bar used to be high. You know what? I just gave up my relationship. I'm done. Giving up. Through with it. Instead of saying, no, maybe that's not the right response. Instead of giving up, maybe I need to just keep seeking God and say, God, would you restore hope that marriage is still a reality? It's still a possibility. It doesn't have to be a dark place. Jesus, let me just read to you this short verse. Then Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and not give up. I didn't even tell you what the parable was. I just told you there's a parable Jesus tells in Luke 18, chapter 18, verse 1. He says, I'm going to tell you this so you keep praying, so that you'll be able to deal with the wreckage and not let hope drop in your life. So those are 3 options. Let me just give you a 4th option. If you're experiencing wreckage, you can just turn around and hurt people. Because here's the reality, hurt people hurt people. It's how it happens. Yeah, I'm in pain, and therefore I'm going to respond out of my pain. And oftentimes, when we're hurt, we just hurt people. And oftentimes, it becomes our default. It can rewire how we respond to difficult circumstances. Galatians chapter 6, verse 9. Here's how this verse starts. Let us not become weary in doing good. I'm not going to read the rest of it. I think we're going to stop there. Don't get tired of it. Don't get weary of it. Why would someone write that? Why would Paul, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, write, hey, don't give up. Don't get weary of doing good. Here's why. Because you can get tired doing the right thing. You can get tired of, man, when something negative happens, I handled it right the first time, the 3rd time, and the 100th time. But man, the 101st time, blew a gasket. I'm going to hurt somebody. Oh, am I the only one like that? Sometimes you look at me and you're like, I don't know if you're tracking. I think you are, because I know some of you. You handle it well the first couple times. But eventually, if the wreckage becomes enough, we get weary of doing good, and we end up hurting people. Number 5, here's another unbelievably bad response to wreckage. You can deny it or live in distraction. Can I ask you a question? As I've been talking about wreckage, and I realize we've been in this kind of dark wreckage thing all morning, so hang with me. It'll get better in a minute. Who comes to mind? Have you been thinking about anybody at work? Anybody in your family? And like that's the predominant thought. Like, I don't mean like, hey, I just brought that up, and now all of a sudden you're thinking about a family member. I mean, all morning long as I've been talking about this, have you been thinking about that person? If so, your response to wreckage is probably denial, because I'm not talking about your family. I'm just inviting you to read a narrative and see if you might identify with Naomi in the story about what your wreckage has been, what's caused it, and your response. The reality is every single one of us has wreckage. And here's what we have to figure out. James chapter 3 says this, but if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, don't boast about it. Here it is, ready? or don't deny the truth. Listen, you might think that your car don't have any dings. It does. And I'm not talking about the car you drive. I'm talking about your soul and my soul. I have moments where my soul responds in an ugly way. Dark moments. And some of them, can I be real honest with you just for a minute? I'll stop being honest in just a second, okay? If you serve God in ministry, you will have so many unbelievable door dings, it's incredible. Because your hope is that I want to serve and love people. You know what the problem with that is? You're dealing with people. Have you been burned enough by people? It can make you pessimistic about, is church really the hope of the world? By the way, the hope of the world is not church. The hope of the world is a healthy church that functions under the leadership and the guidance of the Holy Spirit and has Christ at the center and is biblically based. That's the hope of the world. But you know what? We all have dysfunctions, don't we? And in this, the reality is instead of denying that, to go, you know what, God, there's still some wreckage in my life. And so here's a sixth and final response that you can have. Here it is. Ready? You can return home to God and God's people. This is what Naomi chose. Let me read this to you. She, Naomi, prepared to return home. She left the place where she had been living, Moab, set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Look at how it reads at the end of her story. Back chapter 1, verse 22, and we'll finish with this. So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth, the Moabite, we'll get to her story next week, her daughter-in-law, and arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. Okay, don't miss the end of it. Like, would you underline like the last 6 words of there? As the barley harvest was beginning. Remember why she left? She left because there was a famine in Bethlehem. She left because food was scarce. And every Old Testament story points to a New Testament story. Let me make a connection for you. As a good storyteller, when you're writing a story, you start hinting at something that's about to take place later on. And when the writer says, Ruth and Naomi, they returned, and it's the beginning of the barley harvest. It's the beginning of something that is new. It's the beginning of something that is satisfying. It's the beginning of something that's going to feed them. It's the beginning, and you don't know what's going to happen. But at the very beginning of the story, there's a hint that there's a new beginning that's about to take place. The wreckage is about to be restored. And we'll get to that in the next couple weeks. But she made the decision to return home to God and God's people. Remember I told you in the Old Testament, every Old Testament story points to a New Testament truth? Remember that? Can you think of any New Testament story where someone returns home? Oh, here we go. Jesus told one of those stories. He's like, let me tell you a story about a dad who had 2 sons. Older son and a younger son. The younger son, he was a punk. It's a total loose translation of the story. He says, Dad, wish you were dead. Give me my inheritance. So his dad does it. Gives him half of his wealth. And his son, it says, goes off to a foreign land. Loses all the money in wild living. Spends it on women. Lots of women. And when the money ran out and his friends abandoned him, he finds himself ankle deep in pig poop and slop feeding pigs. And it says he came to his senses. He said, how many of my father's hired hands, the workers on my dad's property, they have a better life than I do. I'm going to go back home. He's not even saying, oh my gosh, I've really disappointed my dad. He's like, my life is terrible here in Moab. And so he goes back home. And in Luke 15, the story goes like this, that when he's still far off, and the dad, standing outside his home, can see his silhouette coming, he knew his son's walk. He was barely recognizable because of how filthy and dirty and broken his son was. But what I'm about to read you is from the Gospel of the book of Luke. And Jesus tells these words. But while his son was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and he kissed him. And the story goes on to say that he throws his son a party. You know why Jesus told this story? Because that's what God feels about people who return home to God and God's people. That's the answer to the story. How did God feel about Naomi returning home, even though she was still bitter? If Jesus would have been there in that moment, he would have thrown her a party. But don't miss this, okay? When that son the one who had wasted his life when he returned home, was he better and fixed when he came back? No, he was a train wreck. He was a mess. And yet his dad loved him and welcomed him anyways. Was Naomi better when she decided to come home? Was she fixed? Was she now Naomi again and not Mara? No, she came back, returned home to God and God's people, and said, listen, I'm not even Naomi, I'm just bitter. Mark my words on this. This is incredibly important because we get this wrong all the time. If you're in the middle of a wreck right now, I'm so glad you're here today. The reason you're here is because you're returning home to God and God's people. You don't have to be fixed before you return home. You don't have to make it right. God will wrap his arms around you and just say, I am so glad you're here. Welcome home. Now here's the amazing part of it. When moving from wrecked to restored, God doesn't leave us wrecked. He invites us to be restored. But please make sense of this. You don't have to be perfect, fixed, better, clean to return home to God. You return home just like you are, and he will welcome you and love you. I think it's the story of Naomi, and I think it's the story that Jesus tells about this son. So here's why I've told you this entire story to land on this moment right here. A wrecked life can be restored when we return home to God and God's people. But for that to happen, that requires people creating a church that welcomes people home. And I just wanted you to hear that. Hey, this morning, you're sitting in these seats and you might be thinking, you know what? Yeah, all that wreckage, I totally identify with that. Some of you are like, no, 10 years ago, there was wreckage in my life, but I haven't experienced that. Well, your application to this might be a little bit different. In order for people to be welcomed home to God and God's people, they need a church that will be God's hands and wrap their arms around them and hug them and welcome home. It requires a church that welcomes back bitter people, resentful people, broken people, dark people, people that are hurting other people. And that's the kind of church that Church on the Hill needs to be. The kind of church where we just welcome people in all their messed up state and we just love them. And maybe that's what you need to hear today, because you might have some friends. You might have some family members. You might meet someone in the lobby today who's bitter, broken, and busted. And if you're bitter, broken, and busted, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome home. You made a pretty good choice today to return home to God and God's people. But make note of this. The same way this chapter 1 is about, hey, you know what? There's a new beginning. The barley harvest is about to begin. I'm just going to tell you this. If you're coming for the first time, second time, third time, 10th time, and there's still this wreckage in your life, listen, there's a new beginning that's about to happen. And I hope that when you read this story in the book of Ruth, that you will be encouraged and your hope will rise, that God's not done with you yet, that there's a new beginning about to happen. Amen? Let's stop and pray. Lord, I thank you that you allow us new beginnings. Lord, there's moments in our lives where we just don't respond well. We just don't think properly about all the things that we've become in our life, whether it be anxious or fearful or depressed or hopeless, or we've just lowered the bar of expectation in our life. And so, God, help us to identify what those are. Show us the truth about us so that we can bring that to you and say, God, would you fix this? Would you make this better? And despite who we are, thank you that you always welcome us home. And I pray that people who are sitting in these seats today, God, that you would, I know they've heard it, but somehow would you sink that deep into their souls that their hope might rise again, that you're not done with them. No matter how wrecked they are, you want to restore them to relationship with you and relationship to people. And so, God, we're not going to give up that hope. We're going to keep hoping in that. And in this moment, Lord, we're going to sing a song, and would you speak to us in that moment? Thank you for those that came today. Pray that they would sense that you're with them and you're for them. And if you want to experience that, would you just simply finish this prayer by saying amen? Why don't you stand with us?